So you wake up one morning, step outside to get some fresh air, and your neighbor is glaring at you like you just personally cursed their entire bloodline. Why? Because their cow dropped dead overnight. That's weird. Maybe it was old. Maybe it ate something bad. Maybe it was just its time. Nope, you're a witch now. Congratulations. Back in the 17th century, you didn't need a bubbling cauldron or a black cat to be accused of witchcraft. In fact, you didn't need to do anything at all. Your best bet was to be completely unremarkable, blend in, and never, ever attract attention. Because once someone got it in their head that you might be a witch, it was over. And the accusations? Absolutely ridiculous. Your bread didn't rise? Witch. Clearly, you used your magic to ruin it. A cow died mysteriously? Witch. Obviously, you cast an evil spell on it. A child got sick? Forget germs. Witches cursed children all the time. You own a cat? That's a witch's familiar. You don't own a cat? Suspicious. What are you hiding? You're too old. Witch. You're too young? Also a witch. You're too rich? Witch. How else would you have that money? You're too poor? Definitely a witch. Why else would you struggle so much? It wasn't just women either. Even men, children, and entire families could be accused. And once that happened, you were stuck in a nightmare with no way out. So let's say someone accuses you. What now? Oh, you'll get a trial. That's fair, right? Wrong, because proving you weren't a witch was basically impossible. The logic went like this. If someone accuses you, they must have a reason, so you have to prove your innocence. But how do you prove that you don't have magic powers? Yeah, good luck with that. And the so-called tests to determine if you were a witch? Pure insanity. The swimming test. They'd tie you up and toss you into a river. If you floated, congratulations, you were a witch and sentenced to death. If you sank, you were innocent, but also dead. The touch test. They'd bring in someone afflicted by witchcraft, like a person having convulsions. If touching you made their symptoms stop, that meant you were the witch who cursed them. If it didn't work, you were probably just using extra strong magic to throw them off. The witch's mark test. If you had a mole, birthmark, or even a random skin blemish, that was proof that the devil had marked you as his servant. No birthmarks? That's suspicious too. Where's your real witch's mark? The prayer test. If you couldn't recite a prayer perfectly without messing up, you were obviously in league with the devil. Stutter? Witch. Mispronounce a word? Extra witch. The cake test. Yes, really. In Salem, they would bake a cake using rye flour and urine from the afflicted. If feeding it to a dog made the dog react strangely, guess what? Witch. Also, disgusting. If you were found guilty, which let's be honest, you always were, you had a few options for how you'd go out. None of them were good. Hanging, the preferred method in places like Salem. But even that wasn't quick or painless. No fancy drop mechanisms. Just a rope around your neck and a slow, agonizing suffocation. Burning at the stake. Popular in Europe. And no, they didn't always strangle you first. Some people were set on fire while still alive, left to scream until they weren't. Crushing under stones. If you refused to plead guilty or innocent, they'd just stack rocks on top of you until your body gave out. It was an endurance test you definitely didn't want to win. Drowning. Because sometimes the trial and the punishment were the same thing. Why waste time with a second step when you could just tie someone up and see if they magically learned how to breathe underwater? Spoiler, they didn't. Whipping, banishment, or branding. If the court was feeling particularly merciful, they might spare your life but make sure everyone knew you were a suspected witch. You might get branded with a hot iron or publicly flogged. Or, if you were lucky, you just get kicked out of town to fend for yourself in the wilderness. Yay? And if you somehow managed to avoid execution, congratulations! You might just rot in prison for the rest of your life. No food, no fresh air, and definitely no hope. Prison cells weren't exactly cushy accommodations. You'd be lucky to have a pile of straw to sleep on, and hygiene. Forget about it. But the worst part? The people accusing you weren't just some shadowy government officials. They were your own neighbors. Maybe you had a dispute over land. Maybe you owed someone money. Maybe your best friend just wanted to get rid of you. Maybe you made eye contact with the wrong person at the wrong time. Whatever the case, calling someone a witch was an easy way to ruin their life. And once the hysteria started, people took advantage. Jealous of a widow's property? Call her a witch. Angry at your boss? Witch. Want to eliminate a political rival? You guessed it. Witch. That one annoying neighbor who keeps borrowing your stuff and never returning it? Witch. The local baker who makes better bread than you? Probably using some dark arts. The Salem witch trials were full of this. Young girls, kids really, pretended to be possessed and started accusing random townspeople. By the time it was over, 19 people were hanged. One was crushed to death, and hundreds were imprisoned, all because of lies. Once the accusations started, no one was safe. Even children were accused and executed. That's right, kids could be called witches too. Some were imprisoned for years, while others were straight up hanged. Imagine trying to play hopscotch in the town square, and the next thing you know, you're accused of summoning demons because you skipped too well. It wasn't just about hysteria. Sometimes accusing someone of witchcraft was the fastest way to get rid of someone you didn't like, and with no real way to defend yourself. All it took was one grudge-holding neighbor or jealous rival to completely ruin your life. So, let's say you somehow manage to survive. Maybe your accuser changes their mind. Maybe you get a rare not guilty verdict. Or maybe the hysteria dies down before they get to you. Great, right? Nope, your life is still ruined. Your reputation? Gone. No one trusts you anymore. People will cross the street to avoid you. Even the town drunk won't make eye contact. Your home? Probably taken. Hope you like sleeping in the woods. Your land? Seized by the government or your lovely backstabbing neighbors. That farm you worked on for years? Now it belongs to the guy who accused you. Your family? Either dead, imprisoned, or too afraid to associate with you. Even if they wanted to help, they're probably under suspicion now too. Even if you were released from jail, you were likely broke, homeless, and outcast from society. No one would do business with an accused witch. Need to buy bread? Too bad. The baker would rather let his dough rot than risk dealing with you. Some people tried to flee, but where could you even go? News of witch trials spread fast, and other towns weren't exactly eager to welcome someone with a reputation for maybe being in league with the devil. Your best bet? Disappearing into the wilderness and hoping a bear is friendlier than your former neighbors. So even if you escaped execution, your life was still effectively over. And if by some miracle you did rebuild your life somewhere new, well, better keep your head down. All it takes is one more bad harvest, one more suspicious glance, and boom, you're back in the noose. When you think of witch trials, you probably imagine women being accused, and yeah, most of the victims were women. But men weren't safe either. In Germany's Bamberg and Würzburg trials, thousands of men were burned as witches. In Scotland, entire families, including men, were accused and executed together. In Salem, men were accused and hanged alongside women. One man, Giles Corey, refused to enter a plea, so they crushed him under heavy stones until he died. Even children weren't safe. Some were accused, imprisoned, and even executed, because if your parents were witches, people assumed you probably were too. Witch hunts didn't discriminate. Anyone could be next. You might be thinking, well, surely people eventually came to their senses, right? Yeah, after centuries of killing people. Witch hunts weren't just a short-lived phase. They lasted hundreds of years across Europe and America, leaving behind a legacy of paranoia, fear, and, unfortunately, some truly creative execution methods. Entire villages were sometimes wiped out over mass hysteria. Salem's trials happened in 1692, but in some places, the hysteria continued into the 1700s. Some accused were jailed for years, long after the trials had officially ended. In Poland, the last known witch execution happened in 1793. Yep, people were still burning witches while the United States was already a country. And in some rural parts of the world, witch killings still happen today. There are still reports of people being accused of sorcery and facing brutal consequences in certain areas. As time passed, laws changed, and society moved on, but the fear of witches never truly disappeared. Even after executions stopped, suspicion lingered. People once accused were often shunned for life, with some forced into exile or poverty. So, yeah, you might love the idea of being a magical spell-casting witch, but in the 17th century, that title was basically a death sentence. Being born a witch back then? It absolutely sucked.